Good morning, and welcome to the IBM Watson Marketing Stage. This morning's panel will be followed by a brief question and answer session. Questions may be entered by going to the Slido link in the Advertising Week app. Select the IBM Watson Stage, which allows you to both submit and vote for questions. And now, please join me in welcoming the co-founder and head of business development for MediaMath, Eric Wasserman.
Yeah.
Thank you, Voice in the Sky. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning. Really elated to have this conversation about some important topics. And I suppose to open, I'll just observe a couple of things. I think that we are in a moment in digital marketing in which there is recognition of its vital importance to a growing economy online. Our lives are only getting more digital and less analog, more devices, more screens, more applications as a result of that, more and presumably better ways to reach the audiences that marketers need to reach. And we're in the midst of a growing economy in digital marketing, $70 billion and growing. And as a sign of that market's maturity, that is when more and more investment goes into this market, and as the market grows, the constituents within the market ask very reasonable questions, and specifically the investors in that market, most importantly marketers and their agents, are asking very reasonable questions about how value is created, who is creating that value. When it's the case that one participant or one entity within that supply chain is creating outsized value, how do we double down on that? And the reality is today that that's a very difficult enterprise. It's very difficult to understand where value is being created, how it's being created, and how to harness that value, and correspondingly how to not invest in those entities that are not providing value. And so I view this as, I view blockchain and the conversation around blockchain as a technology, as a means to discuss existential issues within our industry, and that questions that marketers are asking. Now, solving those problems mean the literal emancipation of digital marketing. So digital marketing needs to grow up to meet the eyeballs that increasingly are interacting with digital devices. And so we're talking here about what's required to emancipate this growing channel. So I thought that was a useful framing because I think what we're going to talk about here, of course, is what is blockchain. I think we're going to start with that fundamental question. But what's required in order to mature it as a technology? And by the way, is digital marketing a good use case for blockchain, or is it a bunch of buzz? And we'll turn to these guys for some answers. I would invite both Chad and Isaac to introduce themselves. Chad, do you mind going first?
Absolutely. So my name is Chad Andrews. I lead IBM's business globally for blockchain and advertising. That really has three dimensions to it. So I lead our global strategy and sort of evaluating. I think to cut to the chase, I do believe in this technology, very bullish on it long term. And I see this as a replatforming of the industry. So where IBM has sort of tentpole fundamental technologies in that shift, sort of forming that strategy. I'm the primary leader of our business development. This is a team sport, as we've talked about. And then thirdly, as I oversee our existing projects, and we have several of those that are in motion as well.
Yes, you do, my friend. Isaac Litsky, please.
I'm Isaac Litsky. I'm the president of _CLT. We are devoted to leading the industry and developing a new enabling architecture layer for digital marketing, which I'm sure we'll talk more about. And I'm very excited to be here with you guys.
Thank you. So Chad,
yes, sir.
In your seat, my understanding is that you have strategically sort of chosen 10 industries that are suitable for blockchain applications. I think it might be worthwhile to talk about a couple of those for framing how other industries have adopted or are adopting blockchain, and then perhaps what we can learn in digital marketing from those experiences?
Great, that's a great question. So across all industries, so IBM is organized into 13 industries. And across that, we at the executive level have prioritized, I think it's 24 or 25 use cases. And advertising is actually one of the top 5, which I'm very happy to say. But just in terms of like the theory around blockchain, so I see it really having 2 fundamental different uses of technology for 2 different types of problems. And these apply as well to advertising more agnostically. The first is around supply chain, and the end effect you want to have is everybody in an ecosystem should have a trusted common version of truth. But there's a garbage in, garbage out problem there. So if you don't have solid workflows and endorsement policies for how data is validated, then the constituents can't trust that data, and ergo, it will never fly. But once you achieve that, you can then do some really new and interesting things around optimizing the supply chain. And that's the fundamental use would be sort of endorsement policies, really governing the trust vehicle for the supply chain and then the optimization. The second use of the technology is more what you would associate with the public blockchains and cryptocurrencies and utility tokens, which is tokenization of assets for trade, where really what you're trying to do is create more efficient value exchange in transactions. So to kind of break down what we're doing in those 2 areas. So has anybody here heard of what we're doing with Maersk and TradeLens? So to give you the quick kind of overview of that. So 90% of the world's goods are in some way affected by overseas freight shipping. And yet like a single container of flowers from Madagascar to Rotterdam can have 200 pieces of paperwork and 30 organizations. It's very inefficient. Any of that's out of order. It delays shipments. If it's a perishable good like flowers, you could actually have a shipment destroyed. So we started working with Maersk, which is the leader in the space last year, and we realized if we just digitize that process, so all the suppliers can actually see the entire supply chain from the time the flowers are picked through to when they're delivered, and all of those approvals and workflows could be consolidated, there would be an efficiency there. And what's really interesting, we've done that, and now it's in production, and now we're bringing the competitors of Maersk and the full supply chain into one global solution called TradeLens. Now, the reason I like that example is the world, so it was actually sort of funny. I first learned about this in a video last year, and at the end, there's sort of this throwaway line in this 3-minute video, which is the World Trade Organization looked at this and said, if this is deployed globally at scale, it could have a 5% positive impact on world GDP. It was like, holy, did you just say that's a $3 trillion use case, right? Just for that one use case. So that to me is sort of a profound example on the supply chain side. And again, you need governance and trust for how that data is shared for it to be trusted and to weed out all the fraud and inefficiency in the system. So that's probably our most mature supply chain use case. In terms of tokenization, so we're working with stablecoins, with Stellar. So
Sorry, Jay, can you define what tokenization is?
Sure. It's essentially an instrument for trade. So you need something that can be traded. And so if you look at, this can get really deep, and I don't want to go in the weeds technically, around like mineable currencies like Bitcoin and Ethereum. There's some really smart reasons for why you couldn't have the strongest computer sort of dominating the network and writing false information, and the way that they created those networks and the mining protocols. But it's also incredibly inefficient from like an energy perspective. The amount of energy it takes to run Bitcoin, I don't know if everybody knows this, is the same as Singapore and growing. Because the bigger the network gets, the more compute you need to solve these sort of large equations. But so the side story on that. So Bitcoin, most of this mining is done with GPUs. So the world's like NVIDIA now sells most of its GPUs are used for Bitcoin mining. A bunch of those miners were migrating to Washington State because there's very cheap hydroelectric power there, and Washington State was forced with this decision: do we put billions of dollars of infrastructure improvement in to serve this growing market, or not? And they ultimately decided not, because that inherently would make them speculators in cryptocurrency, and they don't want to do that. So the IBM perspective is, for most enterprise use cases, we don't want to make a cost of entry to getting the benefits from Bitcoin becoming speculators in cryptocurrency markets. So what we've created, or not, we haven't created, but we're participating we're called stable coins, which are tokens that can be linked directly to fiat currencies, so government currencies, so the US dollar or the pound or other currencies. So we believe we could do a whole seminar on the difference between cryptocurrencies and utility tokens, but the point is we are investing in banking networks like cross-border payments, where banks can more or less instantly share or can trade currencies across different markets that would have taken weeks of settlements before, and do it in minutes and have that tied to real world currencies.
Thank you. Isaac.
Yes, sir.
You're in an interesting position, having founded a blockchain company. Sort of why now? And perhaps knowing that your roots are in digital marketing, literally at the ground floor 20 years ago when the first ads were being served on the internet. Why now? And perhaps what's changed now that you've come back into digital marketing?
So not enough has changed in 20 years. So, as you said, in '99, with Joe Zawadzki, we started X+1, and we didn't have the terms we use now, programmatic and ad tech and all those kinds of things. But the idea was, hey, maybe we can make some intelligent decisions about which ads to show which people, and even customize those ads to those people depending on what we know about them. And it was readily apparent that the then existing infrastructure, HTTP, JavaScript, et cetera, was never intended to support this type of functionality. But in the sort of frenetic pace of innovation progress, we kind of made do, right? We hacked it together with JavaScript and cookies and all sorts of stuff. And after a few years of that enterprise, I went on my way and did some other stuff. So why blockchain? Why now? Again, it's remarkable to me how little has changed in terms of the pipes or the architecture. And yet there's been this sort of explosion in complexity for how they're being used. I think the industry has long known over 5-10 years at least that it's due for a reckoning from an enabling architecture perspective, right? We need a better enabling architecture for digital marketing. And why blockchain and why now is because the thesis, certainly I believe, that blockchain as a tool will play a pretty critical role in architecting that new sort of enabling layer for digital marketing.
The term enabling infrastructure, enabling layer, can you talk more about that? And maybe the framing is in our collective journeys, I think we have opinions from marketers, from agencies as to what blockchain can actually do for them. And some of those themes include discrepancy management, viewability management, fraud management.
Sure.
There are these discrete sort of pain points for the industry today, and somewhat reflexively, I think the sort of go-to answers as to what blockchain can do for me fall into those categories. But this concept of enabling infrastructure, I think, appropriately puts blockchain in its proper context from an infrastructure perspective. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So sure, I mean, blockchain is a new tool. It's a powerful tool. It's an exciting innovation, no doubt. And as a result, unsurprisingly, there's a tremendous amount of energy and attention devoted these days to the sort of how, right? How to build a better blockchain network and faster and throughput and sharding and all that kind of stuff. And that's obviously important work. I think as applies to sort of the digital marketing industry. Certainly the prerequisite questions we should be focusing on are questions like, well, first of all, why, and what, and who, and that's where we've been trying to focus. So, enabling architecture layer. Ours is an industry that let's say has had a remarkable sort of profusion of categories, right, of providers, technology providers, and complexity. Has grown sort of exponentially if you look at it over the last 10, 15 years. We're at a moment where we need to disintermediate and simplify in order to improve the way we all do business together, right? Which is ultimately the goal here, right? Doing business together in better, more effective, more compelling ways. And frankly, I think it's at stake is nothing sort of short of the survival of the industry as an independent industry. But the problem with the need for disintermediation and simplicity is you can't do that by adding intermediaries and by adding complexity. It's not going to work.
We've tried.
We have tried. We have tried.
For 20 years, we have tried.
Exactly.
So, when I look at enabling architecture, the pipes metaphor is so overworked, but for good reason. It's a good one. We need better pipes. We need better enabling technology under the hood. Eventually, we will need, I think, an entirely new infrastructure. There are things we can start to do now to sort of supplement existing infrastructure. What we don't need, in my humble opinion, is, like I said, more intermediaries, more complexity, more categories, new ways, new workflows, and new ways to do business together. Blockchain is a tool, it's a technology. At this point for digital marketing, it represents an opportunity to change the way business is done.
But make just a point about that, because there's often what happens now in the discussions around blockchain is conflation of a bunch of things. So long term, I see blockchain as it's a tool, as you say, it's a catalyst. So blockchain and the ability to have finality and immutability and trust in data is a component that gets people used to working different ways, but it really needs to be coupled with a number of other things to beget the bigger change. And those things are changes to workflows, changes to the way that contracts work, changes to or integrations with other technologies like traditional analytics, machine learning, AI. So there's been a lot of talk in this space in particular lately around overinflated expectations. And what I say to that is if you expect an infant to be riding a bicycle, then yeah, you're going to be disappointed. But really where we are in the evolution of the technology and the crawl, walk, run is more like, honey, my water just broke. That's kind of where, so you have to kind of keep it in perspective that right now we're figuring out what are the use cases, how do we build the initial minimum viable ecosystems and start proving out these benefits. And then there'll be this escalating series, as Isaac says, like we eventually may need to replace pieces or parts of the infrastructure. So this is a multi-year journey, but that's not something that's going to happen necessarily in the next 6 to 9 months.
Yeah, and to say we have a technology that is available to the industry now that properly employed and conceived can instantly deliver full transparency at the layer of financial economics, transparency at the level of business models, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that's great, but sort of the next question is there anyone who wants to be transparent, right? And to answer that question, you got to say, well, why is there maybe some opacity now? Historically, how have we got to understand the way we all do business together now, and we got to figure out ways we want to do business together in the future that frankly work for everyone, or at least for those who are committed to the enterprise of effective marketing.
Yeah, I want to make a point about that. So again, I try to be very careful not to pick on anybody because we're all sort of going through this transition together. But if you look at the agency model today, it's largely their kind of marked up labor. And I think that they realize that they need to shift to becoming more value creators. And blockchain is a phenomenal vehicle for that transition. But you look at some of the scandals in the press recently about rebates and kickbacks and those types of things. So when you peel back that first layer of soil, you're going to see a lot of worms. And so there's the long-term kumbaya game theory where this transparency benefits everyone. But then there's the short-term incentives and how you slowly, incrementally get people off of the addiction they have to certain ways of working that aren't efficient for the incentives in the market. But it's a tricky proposition. Like some of these changes are going to require, some fundamentally different ways of the industry forming its entire business model.
Right, and to your conflation point, no technology in itself is going to compel the ecosystem to do things differently. They, in the real world, need to decide to do things differently. They need to decide what transparency means, what their obligation is to both a supply chain and oftentimes vital places that those entities and those solutions play in that supply chain, but ultimately to the marketer. Blockchain can codify and otherwise receive signal and direction from the from that marketer in this use case, but people need to decide to do different business differently. And I think to the opening, like that is what we're really confronting in the sort of adoption curve right now.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to jump in.
I love that you guys are jumping on these questions.
I know, it's like we're excited. Where is this?
You both make phenomenal points. Well, you go ahead, Chad. I'm going to leave it.
No. Well, so I like specific examples. So an example, so in the long term, when I talk about the game theory, the publishers are getting a minority of the advertisers' spend today. And if there's fee transparency, then and they understand who's getting paid, and it opens up the ability to measure the impact of fees on performance, and you start to cut some of those out, more money goes to the publisher. So that makes a lot of sense to the publisher. But if you're asking today for me to share the price I gave to one advertiser versus another advertiser, that's going to interfere with my quarterly sales. And so I'm probably not inclined to do that. So how do you make that transition from, hey, this is good for you, eat your vegetables, to here's a plate of fries in front of you, and they taste really good, and I'm hungry. So
Right.
there's going to be some interesting dynamics, but that's why we have to start by bringing everybody to the table and starting to work from the inside out and building out these initial use cases.
Right.
And then you start working on the more difficult layers once the network's in place.
And on that point, I wouldn't want us to sort of undersell the sort of the promise or the opportunity from a blockchain perspective. So I think some of these things we've been talking about are kind of the long-standing structural challenges within the industry, right? Viewability, fraud, reconciliations, et cetera. An industry that spends a tremendous amount of time reconciling discrepancies. Let's think about that for a second. And even now there are ideas that the blockchain could help in that effort. Well, the real promise, once we kind of get through these long-standing structural challenges, which, to Chad's point and Eric's point, really requires evolution in the way we all do business together, and sort of a coming together and a willingness to take some risk in order to innovate, et cetera. But once you get through that, on the other side of it, and this is sort of more the idea of this enabling architecture layer, I firmly believe blockchain will enable a veritable boom in innovation. When you look at things like global ID, attribution, when you look at all these interesting ways in which we want to respect the autonomy of the consumer, we want to acknowledge the value of their data, we want to get them more directly involved in the marketing exchange. Really, with a better enabling architecture. The sort of the promise for the industry is limitless, and that's to your point. In some respects, there's this sort of short-term challenge of let's all kind of take a deep breath and sort of make our way into this sort of new regime of doing business together. But the payoff is in innovation.
Mm-hmm. Isaac, I'm hoping you can connect the enabling infrastructure thought to a somewhat tactical, but again, in our journeys and listening to the market, customers and agencies and technology providers, this searing use case of discrepancies. So, enabling architecture discrepancies. To your point, lots and lots of energy, people and systems spent in everyone from ad ops to analysts trying to figure out where the gremlins are in a supply chain, right?
Where aren't the gremlins?
Where aren't the gremlins?
Right.
And help us to think about that, as one sort of benefit to the ecosystem. How do we think about that in the context of enabling infrastructure and blockchain?
Well, I mean, the protocols by which the constituents to digital marketing communicate with each other and coordinate efforts, create the leakage that allows for this fraud and these discrepancies and reconciliation. It's inherent in the pipes. There are ways we can apply new cryptographic tools, blockchain and related technologies to sort of make some progress on that front to solve those problems of fraud, viewability, et cetera, discrepancy reconciliation, et cetera. But again, to take that next step into sort of the new next generation of digital marketing is when we're going to have to work a little harder, and I think it's a longer timescale. But in the short term, this is just the way my mind works. Again, before you get to the how, you got to be talking about the why and the what and the who. And so we've been focusing in the short term, like I said, on how do you reorder business relationships from a contractual perspective, from a business perspective, from a partnership perspective. How do you all come together to commit to meaningfully use these technologies toward a purpose that has some value? And we've set our sights on fraud and viewability and discrepancy sort of management as a sort of first target, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And where the goal and the value that blockchain can inevitably provide, we think, as we sit here today, is not minimizing discrepancies, not creating another tool to the conversation earlier, not another application on top of a bunch of applications that already exist, not data mining tools or better AdOps tools, but the elimination of the concept of discrepancy in the first instance.
Absolutely right. As a theoretical matter, it should not be possible for there to be discrepancies.
And
When businesses are transacting with each other, real dollars, there should not be discrepancies.
right, and help the audience understand why that is the case.
Why we have discrepancies today?
No, why? I think, and we hadn't polled the audience. Agencies in the room, publishers. Hi, everyone. Marketers.
There we go.
Publishers, great. Confronting discrepancies today. I thought I'd see more hands.
There we go.
Come on,
Out
guys.
there, yeah.
It's not a problem. Never mind. Let's move on to another.
That's like solved.
But I think we understand the problem and the plague of discrepancies today in the form of inefficiency, all sorts of ways. But maybe say more about the potential promise.
Sure. I mean,
and why blockchain is a set of protocols that can help that problem.
Sure. So, I mean, at its core, a blockchain network consists of a group of participants. In our case, the constituents to a ad impression or a video, et cetera. And it's a way in which you can impose upon them a set of rules. Smart contracts is the buzzword, but essentially business relationships, contractual expectations, goals and whatnot, and you can coordinate any number of participants, enforce the rules, enforce the intended business relationship, and also guarantee that they're talking to whom they think they're talking to, they're buying what they think they're buying, and there's one definitive and unalterable sort of record of truth. Now, truth is a funny thing. I didn't mean it in that way.
It is. It is a funny thing these days.
Well, yeah.
Truth in the sense of like, the parties need to first come together and decide like what is it that we're looking for the truth on? How do we handle currently, look, fundamentally, someone loads a browser, the publisher serves the ad tag, they think I've just served an ad, 10 million, a bunch of different things could happen that the ad doesn't wind up getting shown to the viewer. Who's right, who's wrong? Nobody's right or wrong. It's the way the pipes work. It's the nature of the business. As a result, you've got people kind of where there's mystery, there's money. Some with good intention try to obscure away the sort of technological complexities with good intentions, with simplicity. Others, frankly, try to sort of abuse the ambiguity and whatnot. But the promise with blockchain is really redefining the business relationships from a conceptual standpoint. What does it mean for all of us to do business together towards the ends that matter to us? Again, things like identity, attribution, innovative models for consumers, moving forward. And once we understand those things, the technology will enable us to implement it, to make it happen.
Just a point on, so our first project that IBM did with blockchain and advertising was early 2017 in Japan. And they have a relatively confined and efficient ad supply chain in Japan relative to the rest of the market. We found that there was 3% leakage, which means that there was 3% that just simply couldn't be accounted for in the system there. So if you apply that to our market, it's probably double, maybe even triple that. So that's just money that falls out that nobody knows where it went in the supply chain. Find me another $200 billion market where there's IAB accepts a 10% discrepancy as allowable or normal. It's nuts.
It is nuts. Right. It shouldn't be acceptable.
Yeah.
Right. In a smaller market, you can live with it. In the market that's growing at the pace that it's growing, at the size and scale that it is today and will grow, it becomes untenable. So Isaac, you've touched on what is required in order to get there. Chad, maybe same question to you. As we sit here today, what is required? What do we do next? What's required to get to a fully blockchained world?
Well, so in the interest of time, there's so much. I wish we had 2 hours. I really
Yeah.
do. I know
In
you
10
all are like,
seconds,
no, but exactly. So we are doing
Promise you're
it.
the only one.
Exactly. It'll just be me talking to my hand puppet. But we're doing it. So and you're involved in it. Both of you were involved in it. So we've started a pilot with MediaOcean. And for those who don't know MediaOcean, because sometimes they're sort of under the hood, they are the media planning, buying, and financial software that underpins virtually all of the agency media buying in major markets. So they have unique access and cross-connection of data within that entire flow today. And so if you look at what the life cycle of a media buy is, it starts with the advertiser budgeting, and then there's a media plan, a media authorization, then there's a PO issued, then the agency orders the media across the suppliers, the campaigns run, then there's the whole financial process of payments, actualization, reconciliation, et cetera. Each of those is, in this case, two-party transactions. That today, if you go out, so if you look at it as an X, like the media running, there's more kind of standardization of those workflows and tools. But as you get out to the individual financial systems for budgeting and issuing POs or for payments and settlements, you're talking about hundreds of different systems out across this ecosystem, and ergo, hundreds of different systems of record. So the first thing we're doing is we're inserting a blockchain so that all of those individual transactions have a workflow that they're validated and trusted before they're written to one single ledger that everybody can access. Now, it doesn't sound like a lot. I've said before that people, I think in their mind's eye, most people that think about blockchain think of, if they were the way it's marketed to them, be like an image of a flying city. But really, the way I challenge people to think of it is like a black and white photo of the building of the railroads, because that's what facilitated the trade that built the cities that eventually had air travel between them, right? So that's kind of where we are. But that's just that basic level of transparency, an advertiser initially being able to dashboard and say, across all of my agencies, all of my markets, without any intermediaries, where are my budgets? So what's been budgeted, what's been ordered, what's been invoiced by the agency, by the publisher, and what's been settled? That's a really good monumental step forward. So we're starting there, and then you should probably talk about what you guys are doing in terms of feed transparency, brand safety, discrepancy management within the actual running operation, particularly programmatic.
Sure. So Isaac, on that score, what opportunities today? Audience marketers, is there something I can do now?
Yes, Eric, there is.
As
it turns out.
the question.
So, at Underscore, we've been doing a lot of work with MediaMath and IBM and others, evaluating a bunch of different technologies, participating in a bunch of pilots, and then also sort of simultaneously modeling some of these data flows and business dynamics that we talk about. MediaMath was an excellent partner for us in as much as they have a product called the Curated Market, where they were, frankly, in my estimation, well ahead of the industry in beginning to solidify some of these contractual relationships, some of these business relationships that actually bring meaning to this idea of transparency. So with that as a sort of a great, promising environment in which to operate, we worked with MediaMath over the last 4 or 5 months to put together a guaranteed viewable market. So we're now powering or enabling, whatever word you want to use, what we're calling a blockchain-ready supply source, clean supply source in MediaMath that is called the guaranteed viewable market, and that is available, I believe, as of today.
Cool.
And the guarantee there is that the inventory will be 100% viewable, I should have said. And there's also a fraud guarantee, and it's backed by dollars. MediaMath will issue credits against any purported deficiencies. With, again, as we talked about, so this is the incremental approach to adding real value functionality under the hood. From our view, not adding intermediaries or complexity, but trying to bring value online. And with as the sort of the infrastructure pieces evolve, you will pretty quickly see these models of a credit or a rebate ideally turn into not ideally, definitively turn into there are no discrepancies in the first instance, and that's where we're working toward. But there are steps you could take now. What we're encouraging folks to do is kind of join us on our product roadmap. And this is the first step.
And toward that, so remember, we're a major B2B brand advertiser as well. So I know our CMO is excited about this as well. You are our DSP that we buy into. And so this is very good for us to have. I've heard from, it wasn't Michelle Peluso, our CMO, was Lisa Gilbert, our CMO out of the UK, had told me one time, she's like, we can't answer the basic question, are we getting what we paid for in programmatic? So this is a really good leap forward in actually beginning to substantially tackle those issues.
Yeah.
And I should also say it's compatible with, it's exciting to sort of think about how this syncs up with the IBM Mediaocean efforts. And we certainly view this as compatible. One of the reasons why I'm so fond of Chad, and I've enjoyed working with him over the months, it's not true at all. Yeah, I'm not a big fan. In all events, I think I don't mean to speak for you, but I think we share the idea that it's going to take a village, so to speak. There are many pieces to the puzzle here, and it's time to get some real thought leadership and some real sort of stakeholders in the proverbial room to sort of make this happen. Because otherwise, the industry could lose the opportunity, and that would be a real shame.
I completely agree. And just we haven't even gotten into just me to try to define what I think is at stake. So I think in terms of the supply chain and just as measured against the efficacy of the working media dollar, I think there's probably 20 to 30% of efficiency on a roadmap that could be taken care of there. But we're talking about, digital programmatic will be $240 billion in 4 years. So it's a lot of money, right?
Meanwhile, with greater efficiencies on the cost metric, I think you will also see tremendous improvements in performance.
Yes, I agree. And that's the other part that we didn't get to and we won't can dive into, but sort of tease it. So if you look at the market cap of Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google, FANG, you've got 2.5 trillion. If you look at the market cap of the top 20 traditional media companies, it's, last I checked, was somewhere at 800 million or so. So you have this giant pendulum that probably about $1 trillion of that market cap came directly at the expense of traditional media.
Yeah.
And it's tied on a rope now. And so the thesis I have is that the reason it hasn't swung back, it's not like marketers and publishers aren't smart enough to leverage data if they had access to. There's a technical, not a business limitation, and that limitation is the ability to pool first-party data at scale without data leakage. When that's overcome, you can see a complete decentralization of what's happening in the walled gardens. And this isn't to knock Google, Facebook in particular. They're great product companies, and they've got great data that they generate. But they shouldn't be the center of the universe.
There's a reason they get as much as 80 or 90% of the spend.
Absolutely. But there's also, if you look at it, 3 things have to happen for them to maintain their valuations. They need crazy high market share, 100% of digital growth in North America last year. They need crazy high margins. And since they couple technology and data, we don't really even know what those are, but we know they're high. And 3 is they need continued double-digit growth in digital. Any of those things start to flag, they have to turn that performance dial to their own performance. And the major problems you have from an advertiser investing in those platforms is they own the consumer relationship. They're pretty stingy in terms of how the data can be used for reporting and measurement, particularly cross-platform. And they bundle the technology and the data. So there's real opacity as to what you're buying. So imagine a marketplace where you could solve those problems. So you're decoupling the technology from the data so you can collapse the margins and commoditize the technology. One-stop shop. Now, when I'm buying data, this would take a longer explanation, but basically the idea of tokenizing data sets into discrete assets that could be priced and traded in a liquid market. So if you do that, the end effect of that will be the data that can be measured to continuously improve performance at the campaign level will be most valuable. The commoditized data, even things like that's valuable data like geolocation, but it's ubiquitous through many providers, will find its price in the market that's more aligned with its value. So the end effect of that is if every 1% that the pendulum goes back against $1 trillion in market cap is $10 billion in value recaptured to people whose names aren't Google and Facebook.
I have 4 questions from the audience here. We don't have enough time from them, but I want to thank Anonymous for asking all 4 of those questions. It's amazing. I think I'll just end on a question that I hear a lot, which is how many years before blockchain can process the transaction volume that we see on a daily basis, even today? When is the promise of that? When is that? How far away?
My answer is to sort of be flippant, as I don't care, because none of the use cases I'm working on rely on billions of transactions. Even the data marketplace I'm talking about, that's not a real-time marketplace built in RTB.
Yep.
It's a sidecar marketplace for pricing and trading on the data that's used to unlock the cohort model. So that, to me, that's the answer. Is I don't really care because there's side chains and things that I want to link data and hash it to my blockchain, but I'm not relying on the value running threaded through that requirement.
Thank you. And with that, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much to the panel. Thank you, audience, and especially Anonymous. And we'll see you around. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.